Right, so thanks to you guys for letting me come in talk to you about being an adoptee and how I became a neuroscientist, specifically looking at impulse control or what you might call willpower. And sometimes you need to exercise willpower, we see today. And some existing neuroscience data on adoptees at the end, which I found quite interesting. So some of these slides I will skirt through. Where's my phone? Just so I keep an eye on the time. Um, but if you want to ask me a bit more, if you want me to go into a bit more detail at the end, I can, of course. So, um, yes, okay. Oh my, why is it not switching? Ah, okay, there we go. So I'll just tell you a brief history about my adoption and my biological parents. I'm an adoptee, and then I'll quickly say something about becoming a neuroscientist and some of the adventures that I've had. Don't let Rachel Butler in. I don't know. Sorry if she's a nice person. Um, and then I'll summarize some of my neuroscience research on impulse control and then some of the data by others in the world. So me, well, not me, my biological mother, because, sadly she died in 2015, and I'm a great believer that I need to put a voice to her because sadly she had a very sad story, unfortunately. She was married to our biological father, but before I get onto that, I'll tell you a bit about her. She was part Ukrainian. Her father was from Lviv in Western Ukraine. So very topical. I didn't really know much about about Ukraine until I discovered my mother. Just to say, I learned about this around about 2020, 2021. My parents, my biological parents. So she was part Ukrainian. Her name was Gloria. Her nickname was Glory. Um, and she gave birth to me in 1975. This is, um, uh, and she was only 27 when she gave birth to me. Previously, she had two boys before me in 73 and 74. And she was happily married. Um, for a couple of years. As you can see, she had a wedding ring on here. In Ukraine, they use the right hand for their wedding ring. But all three of her children were adopted. So why might that be? And so she was, a very happy looking person before she went through all these problems. Uh, she was sadly sterilised without consent after me. She was only 27 years old because what seems like the social services in the UK, and this was the hospital that I was born in Middle England, they decided that she was an unfit mother and wife and decided to take her children away. And then after me, they said, well, before I was born, they said, if you have any more children, we'll take them away as well. But yeah, the eugenics movement was alive and well in the 70s in the UK, and they believed in sterilising foreign, poor, feeble-minded, who they deemed to be feeble-minded women, sadly. She was obviously quite depressed at the hands of her husband, which I'll talk about now. But before that, this is their wedding day. She actually made this wedding dress herself. They'd been married for just over a year before they started having children. They were engaged for a couple of years before that. This is her niece, and this is my biological father, Ian. Uh, and before this, the family that I've got to know, my biological family that I got to know, said that he was a model husband before they started having children. And they did whoops, and they did stay married for the rest of their lives until Gloria's death in 2015. This is Ian, my biological father. As I say, after the birth of their first child, he got really possessive and jealous. She was very different to a lot of the women in the area. She was, part Ukrainian. She was tall, dark haired, and everything else. She sort of stood out. She was very pretty. And all I can think is that he was just very jealous and possessive. So he would go out to work and lock her in the house, and he was quite physically and mentally abusive to her, sadly, as well. And so she got, she really suffered with severe depression, which meant that she was unresponsive emotionally and neglected her first two sons. And because of that, then the social services said I wasn't allowed to go to them when I was born. So I was born in 75 and immediately removed from the hospital when I was born. I was there for 5 days, though. I'll come on to that in a minute. So they failed to help poor Gloria. Here she is. I think, he's starting to be horrible to her at this point because she went from looking like, in the photos, I've only seen photos of her, she went from looking like a very happy and, upstanding, joyful person to this sort of, distracted and, I can't think of the word, but introverted sort of person. And yeah, they just punished her with sterilisation and adoptions, which I thought was awful. She lost everything, her children, her freedom, and her functioning room, aged just 27. And I was born, funnily enough, on the day that the Children's Act was revised, or so they say, in November. And one change in it was that the biological parents were unable to know where I was placed, unlike my brothers before me, who were, the biological parents, Ian in particular, was allowed to stay in contact with his sons, but I was hidden. He did try and find me many times, apparently, but he never was able to. And yeah, so and then actually on the day of my birth, so I was sort of wanted by this couple, by this man, but he climbed the drain pipe of the hospital apparently to try and abduct me on the night of my birth. And the hospital updated its security after that. This is the very hospital. Um, and as I say, I was removed from Gloria immediately after birth and kept alone in hospital cot for 5 days before I was taken to the adoptive family. And it felt a bit like, I mean, I put this is a bit of a joke, really, this certificate of pet adoption, but sadly, it did feel a bit like I was a pet. I mean, in the earlier days, I was very happy with this family, but when I was a child, but as time went on, we sort of grew apart. And apparently, this wouldn't happen nowadays. And I don't regret being adopted by this family, but there were issues that weren't all because of me. Um, and this family was established. They already had 3 children. And initially, I was placed in this family as a place of safety and temporary fostering. But the children persuaded the parents to keep me. And then all the family grew fond of me, hence the pet adoption. And after about a year, they started applying for adoption. I was supposed to be adopted further away from Ian, but the family pressed to keep me. And unfortunately, when I was adopted, the support ceased, as we all probably know. So another real thought decision, really, in this whole scenario. I was born a perfect baby. In fact, the note said that I was an above average intelligent child, which I always like to say. The social worker used to come around and visit my family, and I had good memory, and I was able to remember what we talked about a month before. And so there's none of this like trauma stuff that's peddled to us, that we must be broken children, all this sort of stuff, which I really push back against. But being placed in an established family that had issues already is a bit troublesome. And so another ill-thought decision was that even though the social services had decided to uh, adopt me based on the precedent of my two brothers before me, who I have met, by the way, um, they allowed Ian and Gloria, my biological parents, to come and visit me in this very building. So the social worker would come and collect me from my then foster family and drive me about 4 miles to this building where they would ask Gloria in particular to hold the baby. And after about 3 months of this going on, it was like once a month. The notes say that I started to what Bowlby and Ainsworth would call do the strange situation thing, where I'd cry. I wouldn't, it was very distressing. And that went on for a whole year. Why they decided to do that, I have no idea, given that they'd already decided to have me adopted. So, and then also from the notes that I've read, the social services ridiculed Ian. I mean, he was a difficult man, no one can deny that, and you can't justify being so horrendous to your wife, but they didn't help him either. Both the people in this couple needed help, I think. It was the 70s, but I think they weren't that backward in the 70s. Um, so yeah, so that was difficult. I was eventually adopted 5 years later. Ian continued to fight it and contest it until the social services dispensed with his consent. I didn't know really that any of this was going on. I can't really remember. Actually, I don't remember going to visit them in the social workers' offices. I do remember going to the magistrates' court, and I do remember drawing this picture of the judge who was supposedly quite fat and probably quite arrogant looking, but he didn't. He wasn't too. I think he was upset briefly, and then he moved on. But and yeah, and so that was when I was adopted. I was 5 years old. Um, yeah, it seemed relatively happy. I was the only person though to go to university. I mean, university is not the be all and end all, but there was a lot of differences. Let's just put it that way between us all. I mean, they're not awful, but it was a bad match, I think I would say. But you're not to know that when you're a baby. But I think there were lots of other clues there that should have been considered. And sadly, my adoptive dad, died in 2020. My mum has just recently died in January of this year, my adoptive mum. So Ian, I got to meet him briefly in 2021, and then he died of COVID, sadly. And I never got to meet Glory. She died in 2015. And I've since been estranged from my adoptive siblings since then. And again, just purely because we're so different, that's all. I wish them all the best. And, it's just easier that way. There's not any blame on their part, really. It's just easier, really, to move on in life. So after all that, and as I say, they were very good at, protecting me, I would say, from all of this going on in the background. And then when the adoption was formalised in 1981, I mean, they still had to try and hide me from this Ian character because I think he did find me in the park one year when I was about 7, and I managed to put him off actually. But they were snooping around in the background. So that, and I always knew that I was adopted. But I think it must have been quite anxiety provoking deep down as a child to know that there was this like dark character snooping around in my background. So I like to say, and I'm quite proud of the fact that, and whatever it is, it's probably the routine of the family. Helen's already in, isn't she? So just be careful because I think Helen, unless I don't know whether Helen's still in the group, but anyway, uh, um, so yeah, I think it's just because of the routine that I was given in this family that I think helped me, and there's a few books around the house and all these sorts of things. So, I mean, you could go on for hours thinking about the ways and the whys and wherefores of it. But I did scrape through into university, so it was a difficult setup, and it's not entirely the fault of the adoptive family, I suppose. It's this, as I said, th these people lurking in the background was probably quite nerve-wracking. So I just scraped through, but I always knew that I could do better. And there's always this dichotomy, I think, between who we are in our adoptive families and who our authentic selves are. And I'm grateful that I was able to reflect on who I really was and what I could really do, and don't give up on it really. I suppose don't give up on recognizing who you really are, your authentic self. So after my undergrad, I went to Scotland, and again, I think one thing about adoptees is that we are not only resilient, but we can be risk takers, and we're good at fitting into any place. I'm really good at traveling and settling down in any country, but also we're risk takers. At least I am. And the first the university that I went to for undergrad, I joined the parachute club in Freshers Week and jumped out of the first plane that I ever went in '95. I haven't got a picture of it, but it was a bit like that scene in Bridget Jones, and I did actually land in a cowpat. But I've been doing stuff like that ever since. So there's something about testing yourself. Anyway, after that, I went down to London and did my master's and PhD at King's College, and I really went for it because I thought, well, from my background and all of that stuff, and I didn't know all that information that I've just gone through then, but I knew that there was sort of darkness lurking in my background, but I pushed it aside really, and understood that this was an opportunity that I need to, like a sponge, wring out as much as I can. So I really went for it, and I did well, and I got a scholarship to do the PhD. And then after that, got offered a postdoc in Uppsala University, the oldest university in Sweden, and to look again at brain processes of impulse control, at this point, appetite control and eating disorders. And in fact, the people at King's, they had done some work with that they'd coined the term bulimia, and I believe that they'd done some work with Princess Diana. So they were a really top-notch group, and also in Uppsala. And then I got the chance to, after Uppsala, go down to the University of Cape Town, which was again another moment of like, wow, the girl from the sticks with all this background, uh, going down on a plane, seeing, I'd never been to Africa in my life. I always wanted to go, and I can tell you my fascination with South Africa later. But I just remember seeing Table Mountain. This is the backside of Table Mountain and Devil's Peak, out of this little tiny plane from Windhoek in Namibia for the first time, and just going, pinching myself, it's really true. And I say all this, and I just go through all these things because it's just been such an adventure, and we don't need to be held back by the weightiness of adoption, I would say. This is the other university in South Africa that I'm affiliated to, the University of the Witwatersrand, also in Johannesburg, brilliant university, again, great medical school. And now I'm here at the wonderful Liverpool John Moores University, doing similar stuff. So I'm just conscious of the time. I'll probably be about another 10 minutes, if possible. But I just want to talk you through some of the things that I found in this adventure as a neuroscientist. And hopefully you'll see how it links to what people have discovered about adoptees and their brains. And I want to tell you a little bit, very briefly, about what we're doing right now, hot off the press, in terms of how neuroinflammation and threat perception can lead to sort of psychiatric conditions like anxiety and depression. And certainly that applies to me. As I said, it was probably anxiety provoking as a child to have all this like darkness in the background. And I do think that anxiety sort of features in my life, but there are ways, as you'll see in some of the data that I present now, that you can help overcome that a little bit. So this was it looks a bit complicated, and I'm really going to try and go through this quickly, but basically, but this was a brilliant model. It was new in its time, 2010. This was the end of my PhD work. And basically, in a nutshell, you can see a spectrum there with normal in the middle, talking about appetite control, really. And on the red side, on the left side, you've got severe appetite restraint, severe anorexia, which was my sort of field, going all the way to binging and addiction, addictive behaviours. Actually, anorexia now is regarded as a form of addiction, but back then it was seen as opposing spectrum, an opposing spectrum. And these funny names at the bottom in red here, they're just, so in essence, you don't need to worry too much about what this stands for, but this is prefrontal cortex. So the more you activate like ruminations and prefrontal systems, the more you can control emotion, basically. And I'm a great believer that probably the reason why I sort of went into neuroscience was to choose something really complex so that I didn't have to think about the adoption stuff in the background, maybe. Uh, and on this side, you've got sort of more midbrain dopaminergic and arousal structures that impinge on this. So if you're on this side, this turns down, and if you're on this side, this turns down. So it's an impulse control model. And we've been testing this all through my career, really. I was going to put animations on this, but I decided to just like chuck it all at you in one go on a Sunday evening. Aren't I nice? But bear with me, I'll explain what this all means. So I was lucky enough to get into testing subliminal processing, because a lot of, the things that I was grappling with, at least in my life, were sort of subliminal. They're like, or supraliminal, which is like in the background, sort of worries, not quite sure, like things that I've pushed down. And so I've always been interested in non-conscious emotion in the brain and how it affects cognition. And we did this with anorexia because that is my field. You always have to tether your interests to a clinical thing. You can't just do blue sky science. You've got to do something that's societally useful. I would have loved to have studied adoption back in the day, but it wasn't something that I was looking at then. And so we showed these pictures of food and non-food objects that were closely matched. You can see there subliminally, so non-consciously. And it's interesting that even though it's non-conscious, the brain is able to distinguish between food or non-food. So we could do this. And in a nutshell, this graph here basically showed that when we presented the we also had nasty pictures and neutral pictures. When we showed the non-food images, the patients with anorexia weren't bothered, but as soon as we showed the food, they started to make equal number of errors as the healthy controls. And basically what that means is if it's something that's a threat to you, it's going to impinge on your prefrontal system, like I just said on that model previously. And this just shows the same sort of thing. And this was the model to backward mask it, really. So the take-home message for that, is that if it's something that's like a threat to you, that it could be, you could think of the things that are threatening to us as adoptees, but it impacts your what you might call your executive functioning or your ability to think clearly. What this slide shows, this is a structural brain scan, and it showed, just again briefly, that the more your cognitions are impacted by this non-conscious emotion, the more you're going to work to try and control it and ruminate on it and try and sort of overcome it. And what's interesting, without going into all the ins and outs of this data, but the more you ruminate on something because it's a threat to you, it seems to increase your brain volume. So it's like a muscle. This is what gave us the idea for cognitive training, actually. The more you ruminate and use that part of the brain, it seems to be more active. And it was certainly true that when we compared these are functional scans of bulimic versus anorexic patients. So the bulimics are on the green side of that spectrum model that I showed you at the beginning. Um, the bulimic patients aren't good at ruminating to suppress it. Um, so they show this increased sort of emotion region. But the take-home message of this very complicated looking slide is if something's threatening to you, if something's, unconsciously threatening as well, if it's in the back of your mind and you're going to ruminate on it, it's going to impact these prefrontal cognitions. This sort of says the same thing. This is just ruminations in people with anorexia and showing the prefront. This is the prefrontal cortex, and the same is true of people with obesity. So, as I say, this gave us. There's not too many of these complicated looking slides, but I can tell you a bit more about them a bit later. But this gave us the idea in Cape Town. This is work done in Cape Town in South Africa, to see if we could like, I don't want to say force, but I'll say force people with uh, addiction, remember on the other side of the spectrum of that model, see if we could force them to use that part of the brain, that rumination part, that executive prefrontal cortex part, to strengthen their willpower, to see if they could overcome this like excessive emotion and craving. And we were able to. Again, in a nutshell, this shows that so the blue lines on this graph are the cognitive trained, and their impulsivity went down significantly and their self-regulation went up significantly. And this just also showed that in the prefrontal cortex, we had increased brain volume for those that had greater success. And actually, this is connected to the dopamine region. So it's almost like this is improving the brake system on that emotion. So that was over 4 weeks. So we got them to do daily cognitive training to strengthen that part of the brain that people with anorexia use, and it seemed to work. So we're doing stuff like that now in Liverpool, actually. So I'm just coming on to the final couple of slides on this, and this is what we're doing right now. And I'm waiting to see if we've got this £1 million Wellcome Trust grant to test this in the scanner. This was a theoretical paper. We've done a randomized control trial without scanning to see if it works. And spoiler alert, it does. But this is a model that we developed to explain what might happen. And it is about anorexia, but it's also about any anxiety-related disorder, because anxiety drives anorexia, really. And so this is the beginning of an anxiety disorder. These are stressors. So in our case, you could say every time you have a thought about or some problem with the adoption side of our lives. So these are stressors. When you have a stressor, it increases the inflammatory molecules in your body, in your bloodstream. And in people with anorexia, at least, they at this early stage, because when you're under stress, your brain naturally turns off appetite. The hypothalamus turns off appetite, and it eventually starves the pathogen in essence, and then the inflammation goes down. But people with anorexia, this becomes a learned response. And after when they get to sort of the middle of their serious condition, they realize that if they starve themselves deliberately, it makes them feel more in control of their anxiety because the anxiety goes down. But the body adapts. And so this is how they get into this really awful pit. This is the bottom of the spiral where they have lost so much weight. But if you repeat something, it must have a reward. And the reward for people with severe anorexia that starve themselves almost to death is that it makes their anxiety go down. So we actually just wanted to see, instead of using appetite restraint to lower that inflammation, can we use anti-inflammatories? So not Nurofen NSAIDs because they're bad for the stomach, but what about nutraceutical anti-inflammatories? So I actually found this Boswellia serrata, which is frankincense. You can get it on Amazon and all reputable online things. But look for Boswellia serrata. It's brilliant. It's got a don't let them in, don't let them in. It's got a biological function. It prevents a little bit of nerdy stuff for Sunday night. It prevents phosphorylation of NF-kappa beta. And what I say to my students is, It's like preventing the shoes from going on, like stopping this NF-kappa beta putting its shoes on. Because what NF-kappa beta does is it marches over into the nucleus and tells the genes to increase the production of inflammatory molecules. So we prevent that, but it takes some time. So you have to take it for about a week to 10 days. And we were given a donation. These are brilliant I would also look them up. Future U Cambridge, we're also working with talking eating disorders in Liverpool. Future U Cambridge has got a plethora of brilliant nutraceuticals. Online, you can find them, but they donated the anti-inflammatory boswellia to us so that we could test it. And sure enough, in a nutshell, it lowered anxiety over 4 weeks. It improved their memory over 4 weeks, and it did in two of the markers, but we had some issues with the measuring of the blood markers. It did, though, in two of them, lower the blood markers of inflammation. So great. It shows that it has an impact on cognition in just 4 weeks. So we want to do an 8-week study and look at brain scans as well. So that's what we're doing now. And in a bigger nutshell, to try and improve threat-related psychological issues like we all experience as adoptees, ways that we can manage that. So obviously, therapy is great to help restructure threat perceptions, various different therapies available. I'm also a massive advocate of daily cognitive training, anything. I play a lot of chess online. We've just written a paper to show that chess does improve those similar prefrontal systems. Just 15 minutes a day can strengthen your ability to manage those stress-related emotions. Daily nutraceutical anti-inflammatory to lower the cytokines that squeeze through into the brain, through the blood-brain barrier, and alter brain structure and function. And then other anti-inflammatory lifestyle effects like a Mediterranean-style diet and other lifestyle tweaks. Make sure you sleep well, exercise. Swimming is great, as Vic knows. But those sorts of things can help fend off the anxiety and the threat perceptions that we probably experience. So I promise I'll only be a couple more minutes, but we did start a little bit later. But so with all that said, so my work is looking at willpower and the neural processes of willpower, yes, in eating disorders, but as I said, anorexia in particular is an anxiety disorder. And I, for one, and I'm sure a lot of adoptees experience anxiety. So I just wanted to see whether we have similar impacts on our our prefrontal and anxiety midbrain areas. So I did a little bit of a search, nothing like majorly in depth because there's not a lot out there. And just a quick mention, some of you might have heard of her already, Rebecca Elliott at Manchester University professor. She's just finishing, I think, a study, a brain imaging study, various modalities, structural, functional, in children, and now she's just starting, I think, looking at adults, because obviously the longitudinal effects are also important to study. But there's not a lot out there. So this is what I found. So brain glucose metabolism deficits in these regions that you can see on this map here. So positron emission tomography studies. This is a metabolism scanning modality. And it is the Romanian children, though, so it's not quite the same, institutionalized children, but they showed decreased glucose metabolism in prefrontal. So orbital frontal cortex is between the orbits, between the eyes, and it's for evaluating salience, things that are relevant to us. Prefrontal cortex, amygdala, hippocampus, and brainstem compared to controls. Now, what does all that gobbledygook mean? I would say that probably we are, as a group, and again, these aren't exactly adoptees, but we are hyper vigilant to make sure that we're safe and make sure that, so there is this sense that we might be just as a survival mechanism, over evaluating our environments, and that leads to perhaps a sort of overcompensation, or you're doing it so much the brain doesn't need to metabolize as much as healthy people. Um, there's only a few of these, I promise, so you're going to sleep well tonight. These are so we don't really look at localization of function anymore. We look at connectivity, in between regions. And I want to draw your attention to the yellow. Oh, bugger, sorry. The yellow. Where's my little arrow gone? There it is. This yellow pathway here and here. And as you can see, it's connecting. This is really interesting. I find this very interesting. Um, and these are children that have early deprivation, so they've been removed early from their parents, and there's abnormal connectivity in this. I can never pronounce it. Uncinate fasciculus, I think that's how you say it. And it connects the orbital frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, with a part of the brain called the temporal cortex. And why that's important is the temporal cortex is internal, it's the auditory cortex, but it's also responsible for recognizing things and naming things. And, you can't read a book if you're listening to another conversation on the train because you've got to have that internal thing to recognize things. So again, that speaks to what we saw in the last slide, that if you're hypervigilant, and it's going to impact this system here. So that's interesting, and it speaks to that rumination process as well. And I think this is the last one. So a couple more slides left now. So this is a structural MRI, and a cartoon of it really. But in children adopted internationally, and I realise that I haven't put. Oh no, I have. This is a 10-year-old study. Children who were adopted internationally at average age 1 year versus biologically reared. So that's the contrast. They found broad reductions in cortical volume in the prefrontal cortex, even after controlling for head size. Prefrontal areas appeared particularly vulnerable. Also, hippocampal volume. So that's a part of the brain. So it's round about here for long-term memory. Showed an association with duration of institutional care, and they showed the smallest volume. So it's potentially neurotoxic to be early deprived. But this all sounds very pessimistic, these brain changes and everything else. But I think this is the last slide. Yeah, I end on a positive note, I promise. Let me just say this. So severe early deprivation, common in some adoption histories, leads to reductions in brain volume, particularly prefrontal and hippocampal. Altered connectivity between the prefrontal and those internal self-talk areas. And there tends to be a dose-response relationship to deprivation duration and age adoption. And they can persist into early adulthood, but some things can mitigate, research is ongoing. We need to do a lot more. And I said this study in Manchester. But I want to say, though, that the take-home message, as my life shows, and I think a lot of us, we've done brilliant things, all of us, that it doesn't limit us. I mean, I was adopted I left my mother at 5 days old and went into one permanent family, but I wasn't adopted until five years. So I don't know how much of an impact that had. But interpersonal issues in adoption, I do believe, are systemic. They're not just individual. We're traumatized. The system has an impact on us, and that's a good thing in the sense that if it's a systemic issue as well, we can overcome, I think, the long-term effects of that. And the brain is dynamic, and what we call neuroplastic. So with those interventions that I mentioned, so advocating or utilizing an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, using your brain to do brain training things, chess, reading, all these sorts of things, exercise, keep ourselves healthy, we can overcome some of these anxiety related complaints that we might experience. So I think that's it, folks. We did it. We survived. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Yeah.